All right, this is going to be an introduction video to best ball or a best ball fantasy format for anybody that's looking to get into something brand new. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Zach. You can find me on Twitter at Zacky NFL, and I'm a writer/contributor for The Lateral, a sideways look at fantasy football. You can find them or us on Twitter and other social media at The Lateral FF. Today, I'm going to be taking you through just an introduction to best ball. What is it? Why is it cool? How do we like it? And how can you get started and make it an enjoyable experience for you? So I think, first of all, why best ball? Number one is because it's fun. It's an enjoyable way to play fantasy football. It's a new way to play fantasy football. It's relatively new and it's underexplored. So it's a format that is still being optimized and figured out, which makes it perfect for any sharps looking to find that edge and make some cash, and also friendly for beginners just looking to get their feet wet and experiment and see if they like it. Best ball changes the way you think about the game or the way you think about fantasy football in general, because you don't set your lineup at all. The team that you draft at the beginning of the year is the team that you have for the entire year. There are no trades, there are no waivers or anything like that. You don't set your lineup. So your automatic or your highest scoring lineup every week is automatically calculated and set for you. What that does is it naturally shifts some of what we're looking for into high volume or high risk and reward players over the more consistent players that you might feel more comfortable with. More volatile players generally see an increase in their average draft position in best ball compared to regular redraft or dynasty fantasy football leagues. One of my favorite things about best ball is that you can do a ton of drafts without overcommitting. So if you're someone who absolutely loves fantasy football and wants to be in as many leagues as you can, but managing your lineups, checking the waiver wire and things like that can get overwhelming, best ball is perfect for you to satisfy that itch while also having something that's a little bit more meaningful than just a regular mock draft. So you can do tons of leagues and there's no management required. So being in 5 best ball leagues will feel exactly the same as being in 500, which is good or bad depending on how much money you're willing to spend. One of the best things about best ball as well is that it's offered on a couple of different platforms, and that means it comes with a variety of different price points. You can do $3 drafts on Underdog, all the way up to like $35 drafts on FFPC. So wherever you're at, whatever way you're looking to introduce yourself to the format, you can find a price point for you. For roster construction, one of the first things and most important things, because the way that you template your roster will really have a significant impact on your success in best ball leagues. The general kind of scheme for an 18-man roster is 3 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends. You can deviate from that a little bit depending on if you're playing in a half PPR or full PPR format. If you're in a half PPR league like on Underdog Fantasy, you may want to go up to 5 running backs and maybe 7 wide receivers or down to 7 wide receivers. And then you can deviate from there even further depending on your team build. And what I mean by your team build is the top end players that you select will ultimately shape how you want to construct your roster. You should not be doing a 3-4-8-3 build every single time, regardless of what players you take. There should be context that's taken in. So drafting someone like Travis Kelce in your first round can have you be more than comfortable drafting just 2 tight ends, because the 2 tight ends you take other than Travis Kelce are probably not ever going to outscore him other than when he's on a bye or, God forbid, he gets injured. So it's kind of a wasted pick at that point. So you can get away with 2. You have Travis Kelce, who you rely on pretty much every week. And then for random buys, injuries, or boom weeks, you could have a second tight end that could fill in for you. And that gives you 1 extra spot to play around with, where you can go to a 9th wide receiver, a 5th or even 6th running back, and things like that. Quarterbacks are the exact same way. If you grab an early quarterback, if you're one of those people that absolutely loves Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, you're going to have to pay a hefty price for them. And that's okay. But you should also maybe spend less overall capital on the quarterback position as a result, because grabbing Baker Mayfield later on in your draft is awesome, but he's probably not going to outscore Patrick Mahomes most weeks. So you might be better off getting Patrick Mahomes and then a cheaper second quarterback for those same boom weeks, bye weeks, or injuries. You'll see that the shell of teams generally changes, and you can kind of mess with that however you want. But there is no one set roster. Like if you go with 2 quarterbacks or 3 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends or 3 tight ends, if you push it to 4, 5, or even 6 running backs, it's not going to sink your team. It really should just depend on how the draft goes, just like any other league. One thing that's really cool with best ball, one thing that you can have a lot of success with, is zero running back, or at least modified zero running back. Because of the way best ball is set up, you can get away with not having any elite running backs, because if you fill your roster out with a bunch of pass-catching running backs, guys like Leonard Fournette, J.D. McKissick, Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin, all of those guys can be had in rounds 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But when they're catching 3, 4, 5, 6 passes a week, and that adds up over PPR, they can give you production that's not on par with the elite running backs, but the gap between them is not as significant as the gap in draft capital investment. So zero running back is generally possible. It feels a little bit better the lower you go in PPR formats. Half PPR it's easier to get away with. Full PPR, it's a little bit harder. But then you just place more emphasis on those pass-catching running backs that we were talking about earlier. One thing that I really like doing is a modified form of running back, or a zero running back, or modified zero running back, which would be taking one elite guy probably in the first round. So if you were picking at like 101, I would take Christian McCaffrey all day long. But then I don't feel the need to hit running back for another 3, 4, 5 rounds, because I have Christian McCaffrey as my anchor. He's going to be scoring 20, 30 points a week. If I have a replacement level RB2, I can really boost my chances of winning by having a significantly stacked wide receiver core instead. So grabbing someone like Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, those are players that you can get away with modified zero running back, and then not touch running back for another 3, 4 rounds until you start hitting those cheaper middle round running backs that offer a lot of upside, again, like Chase Edmonds, Myles Gaskin, Leonard Fournette. Those are really popular players, and they work out for a lot of championship winning best ball teams. Someone like Myles Gaskin in particular, I would consider a fulcrum player. So fulcrum players are kind of the guys that there's risk involved. There's uncertainty baked into their average draft position. But if you hit on them, it can turn a decent to good roster into a heavy title favorite. Myles Gaskin is my perfect example. Right now, you can get him in rounds 7, 8, 7 or 8 or so in underdog best ball leagues. And that's because people are afraid that the Dolphins are going to draft a running back in the draft. But if there is a chance that somehow Gaskin emerges from the draft unscathed, just like he emerged from free agency unscathed, his ADP would be comically low at that point. It's going to skyrocket after the draft. And if you can get in early and hit on a few of those players, they can boost your team to heights that aren't really possible otherwise. So fulcrum players are guys who you're targeting in murky situations where you can find that huge value if things break right for you. And if they don't break right, you're drafting them late enough that it's not going to kill you anyways. Even a super high-priced example would be Aaron Jones before he had re-signed with the Green Bay Packers in free agency. Aaron Jones was a mid-second round pick, even falling to the late second round early on in free agency before he had signed anywhere. Now that he's back in Green Bay, signed with Aaron Rodgers and tethered to that prolific offense, his average draft position has brought him back up to the first. He's going as like the RB6 or RB7 off of the board. And if you had grabbed him much earlier on, that's a huge potential value gain for you. So then we go to part 3, rookie hype. So part 3, talking about rookies. Everybody loves rookies. They're the shiny new toy. We're drafting in best ball a lot of the time as we're leading up to draft season. So we're falling in love with prospects. We're talking and comparing Jamar Chase to Jalen Waddle to Devontae Smith. Even Terrace Marshall is exploding in popularity recently. It's very important to keep rookie hype from becoming rookie overhype, not letting those ADPs get so inflated that you're drafting rookies when they're not really going to produce at the level that you might be expecting. We have classes like 2020 where it was historically great. There are also classes that are historically really underwhelming. And if you put too many eggs in one basket for those young players, you're risking a lot and you're leaving a lot of value on the table, specifically veterans. One example that comes to mind right away in terms of rookies or young players, I should say, compared to vets would be CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb is a phenomenal player. He's incredible. He had a great rookie season despite the never-stopping carousel of quarterback play that the Dallas Cowboys had and the turnstiles that their offensive line was. But I think it's a really risky bet to make that CeeDee Lamb will outscore Amari Cooper, who's the leading wide receiver on the Cowboys, for just next year. In just 2021, Amari Cooper is probably very likely to outscore CeeDee Lamb. Yet they're going almost back-to-back in average draft position because people are really expecting CeeDee Lamb to make this ginormous leap that may not necessarily come to fruition. Whereas Amari Cooper, we've seen be successful time and time again. And he was, I believe, the overall wide receiver 1 through the first 5 weeks before Dak Prescott went down for injury. I don't necessarily see that same top 5 overall upside for CeeDee Lamb, but his average draft position would have you believing that. Other things, guys going in similar spots. You can see T. Higgins is going really, really high despite concerns that the Bengals might draft Jamar Chase, whereas someone like Keenan Allen is relatively locked and loaded as the Chargers wide receiver 1, despite where they're going pretty close to one another in average draft position. Don't sell out on those 26, 27, 28-year-old wide receivers just because they're approaching that 28-year-old end of their era kind of spot. This is not Dynasty. You only need to roster them for one season, and veterans generally produce much more. So I would lean on those veterans when you're doing that. And finally, I'll talk about rookies in terms of using the draft to your advantage, similar to those fulcrum players that we were just referring to. You can use the draft to your advantage. If you know, or at least if you are well studied in terms of the draft, mock draft, team needs, if you have a general idea of what potential landing spots players could have, you can use that to your advantage to stack players at a supreme budget. An example of this would be if you are a big fan of the 49ers, San Francisco's offense. George Kittle is a great pick in the 2nd round. Brandon Ayuk is going around the 5th round. And both of those seem like great values to me personally because I think both players have top 5 upside at their position, and Kittle obviously has number 1 overall tight end upside. I've been really enjoying, and I think I'll find some success with drafting a lot of Justin Fields later on in the draft. He's going really, really late in drafts. You can get him in the 13th or 14th round of best ball drafts, so there's not much opportunity cost to grab him. But if you pair him with Kittle and Ayuk, or even Deebo Samuel a little bit later, and then Justin Fields lands in San Francisco, his average draft position is going to shoot up. He's going to go rounds and rounds ahead, but you've already got that stack lined up, and you did so at a much cheaper cost. You could do the same thing with someone like Jalen Waddle. If you really think that Jalen Waddle falls to the Los Angeles Chargers, then in any draft where you find yourself taking Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, maybe you take a speculative ad and you go for Jalen Waddle there, because if he falls on the Chargers and that bet comes to fruition, your offense is looking stacked. And those levels, those high quality stacks can make or break championships. And then part 4. Final part. Identifying misvalues. Another thing that really, really helps in terms of best ball is identifying the players that are misvalued. Players or teams that are being priced asymmetrically. And what I mean by that are either players being priced at their floor and not for their potential range of outcomes where their ceiling could bring them, or the opposite, players being priced at their ceiling and not recognizing that that floor can get way lower. 2 examples that come to mind right away for individual players would be Stephon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills, who's being drafted as the number 3 wide receiver off the board right now in most underdog best ball leagues, which to me feels like you're drafting him at his ceiling. It's really expensive. He's no doubt an incredible player. He's a top 5 wide receiver, and he's very likely to finish there again. But that's a steep price to pay when you think you might be able to get someone who offers similar production, like Keenan Allen, a little bit later on in the draft. Players who are priced asymmetrically at their floor with no room for their upside, or at least not baking in their upside to their ADP, would be someone like Jared Cook, who's going comically late in these drafts despite being the only real tight end on the Chargers roster. He's a huge red zone threat. And that Chargers offense looks like it's ready to make a leap forward. They've improved the offensive line. You have a second year of Justin Herbert. Hopefully Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen will both be healthy throughout the year. Things are looking really good that if you can grab Justin Herbert early on, Jared Cook is a great guy to pick up later on in your drafts. Tight end is such a touchdown-dependent position already. Grabbing a really good red zone threat like Jared Cook and being able to stack him with a quarterback that has top 5 or even top 1 upside like Herbert can pay huge dividends for your team down the line. Similarly with teams being priced asymmetrically. So a big thing in best ball is stacking specific teams. 2 of my favorite teams to go after this year besides San Francisco would be Buffalo and would be Dallas. I really like Buffalo and Dallas because I think they offer a good variety of upper, middle, and lower tier options that are all attractive at their relative ADPs. I know I already kind of said Stephon Diggs was being priced a little bit too high for me, but grabbing someone like Josh Allen in rounds 5 or 6 generally, and pairing him with Buffalo's other pass catchers like Gabe Davis or Emmanuel Sanders down the line, I think could be really, really good and is really cheap. There's not a lot of opportunity cost to pairing that. But if Gabe Davis continues with his really nice production as a rookie with all of the red zone targets he got and the production he had despite limited snaps, the sky is the limit. Teams priced asymmetrically for me would also be someone like Baltimore. Baltimore is not a heavy passing offense. We all know this. They're a run-first team. But Baltimore receivers are tending to fall more than they should because it seems like everybody and their mother has it in their mind that Baltimore will finish dead last in passing attempts, which is probably true. But there is a chance that they take a step forward. Maybe they recognize that being overly reliant on the run might not get them as far as they want to. Maybe they need to open up and pass the ball more. And if that passing volume increases just even marginally, someone like Hollywood Brown, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, they could all see a significant uptick in their production compared to their average draft position, and they could find themselves being great values. Buffalo last year was a great example. Going into last season, Buffalo was a really nice team to target, as they are again this year, because they had been trending upwards in their passing volume consistently for like 2 years in a row. And last year, once Josh Allen came, and then last year, Josh Allen finally took that leap forward with the Stephon Diggs, and their passing volume exploded. And that opened up so many opportunities and points for all of their pass catchers. Guys like Cole Beasley had career seasons, and it was because of the uptick in passing volume. So you want to be able to identify teams where that similar thing can happen. You want to take advantage of that if you can get in on the ground floor, because the only way to go is up. I kind of cap it with the idea that risk and uncertainty are your friends. The biggest values can emerge from the murkiest waters. If you think of Jacksonville last year, no one knew what to do with Jacksonville's running backs. They didn't know what to do because you didn't know who it was going to be. Eventually, it turned out that nobody mattered but James Robinson. He had the most absurd rushing share splits of all time, but he finished his way to a top 5 finish at the position. And you could have gotten him very, very late on if you drafted early on and took a shot on him. That's what you want to do. Find the murky waters, find the uncertain backfields. And if you end up nailing or landing the right number 1 running back from someone like San Francisco, where it could be Mostert, it could be Wilson, it could be Hasty. If you take a bet on Jeff Wilson and get him there, you can do some great things, and it puts you in a really strong position to win your best ball leagues. And that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything more to talk about for an intro video, but I'd just recap with best ball is an amazing format. It's really fun. It's very easy to get hooked on. You can have a ton of fun practicing your drafts in a way that's meaningful and can also make you some money. And it's a really great way to start getting in early for a format that I think has a lot of room to grow and explode in popularity.